I'll put the slides. Sure. Thank you. You need help? When you come back, we can start. Well, hello everyone. We'll start momentarily. I just wanted to share with you, welcome, and I'll welcome you again in a little bit, in 2 minutes. I just wanted to say we have some books and Rojava, Emergency Committee for Rojava bags for sale, and also some material, our brochures for free, of course. So please stay. At the end, we'll have a long Q&A, and we'll also, if you are interested in checking the material out, that would be lovely. So we'll start in a minute, I guess.
Yes, and there is a sign-up sheet.
Oh, and yes, there's also a sign-up sheet going around. This is our first in-person event since COVID hit. So if you could sign up, if we could stay in touch with you, that would also be wonderful, because we're hoping to have, in addition to our ongoing online events, we're hoping to have more in-person events and meetings if you could join us. So please sign up if you would like to.
I was timing my talk, you know. I really want to keep it within the
Debbie?
thing, you know.
We're ready, thank you.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this event organized by the Emergency Committee for Rojava. It's very nice to have our first in-person event since COVID has hit. And we've been going online, we've been organizing reading groups and meetings all online up to this point. But here we are, we have some people in the room, and thank you, those of you who are watching us online. So this is a special event. This year has marked the 10th year anniversary of the Rojava revolution in the North-East Syria, where people have been building a new political system based on principles of gender equality, grassroots democracy, pluralism, and ecological sustainability. And over the last year, this project has been under increasing attacks by NATO member Turkey, that has waged a long-standing war against Kurds, both inside Turkey and in its neighboring countries, Syria and Iraq. And today actually is a special day for that. We have just seen videos of PKK guerrillas who have been attacked by chemical weapons by Turkey. So these attacks go on as we speak, and that's why it's incredibly timely to be joined today by Anya Briy and Steven De Castro, who have been in North-East Syria and in Iraq's Sinjar province recently, so they will have a report back. And before I go ahead and introduce them to you, with deep sadness, I want to recognize and dedicate this event to our co-founder, Meredith Tax, who unfortunately passed away last month, which is an incredible loss for us, for the Emergency Rojava Committee, which she co-founded, for all of us personally, and for feminists globally, and for all those who are fighting for a more egalitarian, just, power-free world. And so with that sadness, as we dedicate this event to Meredith Tax, we want to just share a short video that we've prepared for her. And we hope to have a memorial, an online memorial event for her in the coming months. This is just a little dedication video. Please, if we can have the video.
The reason Rojava was able to defeat ISIS when nobody else can is that they fully integrate women's leadership on every level, from the neighborhood commune to the top military command, and thus they are able to draw on the strength of the whole society. And as people have said, this is part of a long history. It wasn't easy. The women had to fight to get into this position. That when hundreds of them in the early 90s went to the mountains to join the PKK, they didn't get a warm welcome from most of the male guerrillas. Some of the commanders wanted to send them home. Some wanted to marry them, but the women persisted. And they were encouraged by the PKK's leader, Abdullah Öcalan, to organize autonomous women's military units and play a leading role in the party. And this turned out to be very important because the women's ideas of what should be done turned out to be opposed to the approach favored by some leading commanders. And thus the change that resulted from including autonomous women's units was not only quantitative, but qualitative, and resulted in backing away from a purely military approach and a new line that emphasized community organizing and negotiations with Turkey. So fast forward to Rojava, which Debbie and Aslam have both talked about already. But so I'm not going to go over the mechanisms that they described about the ways, the different structural and ideological and programmatic ways that women are brought into a position of equality and at the same time maintaining autonomous women's groups and working in mixed groups. But just compare this with the operating system of any progressive organization you have ever been in. Compare the strength and resilience of the movement that beat ISIS with the strength we are going to need in our battle against the global right. And look at the women's movement globally. Now, it's not as strong as it was in the 90s. Who is? It's weaker, it's more NGO-based than the Kurdish women's movement, but it still has enormous strength, as shown by massive Latin American marches against violence and for abortion rights, the leadership of women in places like Sudan, the huge, diverse US women's resistance movement, exemplified by the work of Black Lives Matter, the Rising Majority, and the women's marches, all led by women of color. Think how much stronger we could be if this feminist movement and the progressive movement internationally were partners.
Well, on Meredith's note, we have a long struggle ahead of us, and especially, in this time when there is the whole backlash against women's rights in the US, and we have a very powerful protests, but they're being quite violently repressed in Rojava, that's the parts of Kurdistan in Iran and broader Iran. So we will try to continue Meredith's path as the Emergency Committee for Rojava. And with that note, I want to introduce today's speakers and also our discussant, dear Debbie Bookchin. So we'll start with Steven De Castro, who has dedicated his filmmaking to capturing peasant revolutions around the world. His last film, Revolution Selfie, The Red Battalion, chronicled his time with the New People's Army of the Philippines. His next film, Revolution Selfie, War with No Name, follows the struggles of the Yazidi people who continue to fight against ISIS and other powerful enemies seeking to take their land. And that will be continued by Anya Briy, who is a New York-based activist, researcher, and writer focusing on the Kurdish movement in Syria and Turkey, and also the indigenous movements in Mexico. Her writings has appeared in The Nation, Open Democracy, Left-East, Jadaliyya, and The Region. She has just returned from a 3-month-long trip to North-East Syria. And Debbie Bookchin will be our discussant today. She's an author and investigative journalist who has written for The Atlantic, The Nation, The New York Times, The New York Review of Books, Roar Magazine, and numerous other publications. She served as press secretary for US Congressman Bernie Sanders from 1991 to 1994. She is the co-founder of the Emergency Committee for Rojava and spent several weeks in Rojava in 2019. Debbie is the editor of several new editions of books by her late father, Meredith Bookchin, including The Philosophy of Social Ecology, From Urbanization to Cities, and The Modern Crisis, recently published by the AK Press. She also co-edited The Next Revolution, Popular Assemblies, and The Promise of Direct Democracy by Verso in 2015. And she is the co-author of the book, The Virus and the Vaccine, St. Martin's Press. So thank you again for joining us today. Steven, we'll start with your report back.
Okay, thank you. And thank you guys for coming. It's one of our first events, offline events, since this pandemic. And so what I'd like to say is that I spent months with the Yazidi people in Sinjar. It's a mountain range in northwestern Iraq. I'm going to tell you about it and tell you why it's important and related to the Rojava revolution. So first of all, Yazidis. Who are the Yazidis? So Yazidis are an ancient people who believe that they arose from the Garden of Eden, and their belief system is related to Zoroastrianism, Islam, and Judaism. Their practices center on an angel who created the entire world. He's one of the 7 angels of God, and he is referred to as the peacock, or the peacock angel. And so this is where their practices are centered on. And so does that sound weird to you? Because if it does sound weird, you'll then understand that religious fundamentalists of all types hate the Yazidi people, and for centuries they have had many different problems. Many different genocidal acts have been committed against the Yazidi people. There are about less than 1 million Yazidis on the planet. And Sinjar is the ancestral home of the Yazidi people. About 400,000 is the home of about 400,000 of the Yazidis. Now, as I said, they have been hated by many religious fundamentalists, and no one has shown their hatred more than ISIS, the Islamic State. So I'll review that too, about the Islamic State, who they are. So Islamic State arose out of the U.S. invasion of Iraq, and the U.S. decided to fire all the government employees of Iraq after the invasion, which included the soldiers who were related to Saddam Hussein's Ba'ath Party. And so a lot of these Ba'ath military, the top commanders and the best commanders of the Iraqi army, were placed in a U.S. prison camp run by a U.S. military called Camp Bucca. And there they met up with and formed a network with al-Qaeda members, also top echelon al-Qaeda members under the leadership of a guy named Baghdadi, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. This became what's known as the network which formed Islamic State. And so what happened in 2014 is very important to Yazidis. I don't do movies about history, but this history is important. That in 2014, Islamic State decided to make a pact with a Syrian group called al-Nusra. Al-Nusra had received millions of dollars from the CIA as well as the Turkish state to fight Assad, the ruler of Syria. But these guys decided, let's get together and we're going to plan an invasion and takeover of all of Iraq to create an Islamic caliphate. And so standing in their way and right on the road between Raqqa and Mosul is a mountain range. That is the Sinjar mountain range. And so they needed to take that over in order to take over all the rest of Iraq, which they did take over almost all the rest of Iraq. And so this is where this invasion occurred. I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. And so I'm going to ask David if you could now play number 2, if you can, a little 6 minutes of video from my movie. That all the towns at the foot of Mount Sinjar bear the scars of genocide, or maybe the scabs of genocide, because I don't think they're old enough to be scars. In 2014, this place was a vibrant shopping center, perhaps for centuries, in this area of the Yazidi people. And ISIS, with an objective to commit genocide, came and swept through this area and attacked it. And the fight to invade and then the fight to liberate this town took its toll. And as you can see, there's almost nothing left. It's not a carpet bombing. It's mostly mortars and RPGs, grenades, and it was basically up close and personal type of war. And that the fear of the people in this town is that this type of jihadist terror might actually return to this land again. I've talked to Nadia Navrazov, a lawyer with Yazidi, an organization which has been documenting thousands of witnesses of what happened here to the Yazidi people.
So when ISIS came in the night of the 3rd of August, Yazidis were on their own because Peshmergas and forces that were supposed to protect them had left during that night, leaving Yazidis without, weapons, without any protection. So these men tried to defend their villages as long as possible, and while they were doing that, a lot of Yazidis, including children, women, elderly, started to flee towards the mountain. Unfortunately, many were killed, and also many were captured. So when ISIS managed to capture some of the people, again, they had a very organized plan. The idea was to separate first men from women. In the group of the men, to select the boys who were still young enough to be brainwashed and trained, and to kill the men who were, too old now to be brainwashed. The women were taken to different places, to Mosul, Tel Afar, later also Syria, and they were enslaved. The most beautiful woman, and what ISIS was thinking is beautiful. I mean, it's very subjective. They were taken first, and then everyone was taken at some point.
Happy and excited fighters in a video apparently from the Islamic State. Today is the slave market, God willing, says one. This may look like some kind of terrible joke, The prices for Yazidi women are discussed in detail.
But ISIS could go no further. A small group of fighters crossed the Syrian border to stop the slaughter. They were not Yazidis. They were the anarcho-communalist revolutionaries of the Kurdish freedom movement known as the Rojava Revolution. The Kurds held the high ground against the terrorists. Eventually, more and more Rojava fighters came to push ISIS back. With the help of U.S. air support, the PKK and YPG forces opened a corridor so that Yazidis could flee into Syria, where Kurds welcomed many Yazidis into their homes for years. But the Kurds didn't just defend the Yazidis, they armed and trained them to take back their own land. Many Yazidi volunteers were women. Many of them had escaped slavery. Volunteering by the hundreds, Yazidi women picked up arms and crushed the rule of their slave masters. At least 500 liberation fighters gave their lives to defend Sinjar. Their images stand watch over the towns today. Their eyes exhort us to continue the struggle. Okay, so you might have actually heard of this issue about the Yazidi genocide. And as a matter of fact, it seems like it's being talked about even more now. But the narrative of the Yazidis, in a sense, is a bit of a lie. Because essentially it's the NGOs and the surrounding states that are ruling the narrative about the Yazidis. And so if you see any story about Yazidis, it's almost always connected to some type of NGO. And so what I think is wrong about that is that the Yazidis are not victims or just helpless in the situation. The Yazidis have been a fighting warrior people for many, many centuries. We don't even know how long. And they did not just tolerate that situation. They stood up and fought. And that's what I found out when I got there. Okay, so the Yazidis created their own revolution. You might be wondering, why is it we have an emergency committee on Rojava and we're talking about Yazidis? The Yazidis created their own revolution, part of the Kurdish freedom movement according to Öcalan's philosophy, and their own defense force in Sinjar. YBS is the men, YJS, the women, and the Asayish, the Revolutionary Police Force. So this is all under the Autonomous Administration of Sinjar and also the women's movement, many different women's centers and women's organizations in Sinjar. And let me see. I'm going to play you guys clip number 1, if I could, David.
I see a new face coming up the hill every day.
Introduced it a little bit. Yeah. Sorry, guys. I should have told you what I'm about to show, but I got so caught up I forgot what I was about to show. So, what I'm going to show you right now is a little bit of the organizing process of a revolution. And so, the idea of it's not just a bunch of people running around with guns. A revolution is a whole lot more. And so, this often takes if a revolution is a revolution at all, it's about an organization or a revolutionary party creating structures for the people, for their own liberation, to start doing something that Iqbal Ahmad says is the message is, we are the government. The Revolutionary Party starts to take over the governmental functions and becomes its own administration. So what I figured out was that I'm going to throw in for you guys to compare the Philippines, and then following that, come back to Sinjar. So in the Philippines, this is more like shadow government, which is a lot of what happens in a revolutionary situation where they're fighting for a revolution. After the shadow government part, there is kind of like the administration part, where you might call it, they say, autonomous administration of North-East Syria or Sinjar or whatever. And so that's what I'm showing you in this clip right here. Sorry, David, if you could play it again.
I see a new face coming up the hill every day. Yeah. When the battalion isn't scrambling to organize this big anniversary, it's usually focused on organizing the masses, meeting with them, and holding elections for officers to a shadow government.
The NPA does not show up as Santa Claus. It does not monopolize credit for having reduced the land rent. It is an instrument of the people for reducing the land rent, but the people themselves have to show unity, and sometimes they have to protest to back up the demand. Then they negotiate. The landlord will know that the NPA is around.
Just like Christian missionaries build churches wherever they go, the Kurdish freedom movement builds assembly halls like these. In this way, revolutionaries represent their core beliefs in bricks and mortar. And what they believe in is direct democracy and gender equality. This is their altar. The walls are decorated with the images of those who have sacrificed for that altar. But the big assembly is just part of a long process for making community decisions, usually involving discussions in people's homes, often with men and women separately to make sure everyone is heard. This is also where the community love comes out too. Poor people dishing out more food than you could possibly eat in one seating. A great energy infuses this once closed society. They've opened their doors to outside influences and are forging new paths. Yazidis live by traditions going back thousands of years, yet their revolution is barely a few years old. It's like witnessing the rebirth of a whole people.
Okay, well, thank you, guys. I'm about to wrap up.
Chris, I see a new face.
I'm about to wrap up this presentation. Oh, thank you. So this Revolution Selfie, War with No Name, is a movie where I'm in post-production right now. It's going to take several months. You actually could help me out. My name is Steven De Castro. If you join my Facebook, that would be great, because I do test screenings to help me to develop the movie, and it'd be great if you guys could be part of that. If you're interested in, I gave you a lot of information all at once, but if you're interested in an outline of my talk, I've got about 10 copies right here. And so then I'll wait till the Q&A for anything else. But again, thanks for coming, and let's keep up the struggle, keep up the fight.
Thank you so much, Steven. I hope you'll go to Rojava soon as well. And next time we'll have an event where you'll show us some footage from Rojava, because I do not have those skills, unfortunately. But I'll share some pictures. So hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. As Özlem mentioned, I spent 3 months in Rojava. Just came back a few weeks ago. I was volunteering at the University of Rojava, teaching English conversation. It's one of the 3 universities that have been established by the autonomous administration, and they're actively functioning now. And that gave me an opportunity to meet a lot of people and to sort of understand the daily reality and also to interact with people from different institutions of the autonomous administration, as who are active in different spheres of the revolutionary organizing. And a lot of things do look similar, I have to say. And what I saw was that the revolution is an ongoing process. It's not a finished event. And basically everyone with whom I talked recognizes this fact that it's going to take a long time to achieve the revolutionary objectives, because what the movement is doing there is not just replacing some institutions with others. Everyone is saying we are changing minds here, and that just doesn't happen overnight, and that doesn't even happen in 10 years. It's been 10 years, as I mentioned. What I also saw is that the revolution is facing tremendous external challenges. I mean, just think of it. There is a decade-long war that is still ongoing, an embargo, an economic crisis, and for a lot of people, it's just hard to see a future for them in that region. And these external challenges, unfortunately, greatly undermine the capacity, the ability of the movement to continue with their struggle and to accomplish more on top of what they have already accomplished. But I will talk about the challenges later, and I'll start with some of the more positive things that I witnessed and learned about. So, if you want to guess what I'm going to start with, it's women. And understandably, I mean, the women's movement is truly the most advanced and the most tangible, the most visible achievement of the revolution as a whole. And I've heard many women saying that before the revolution, 10 years ago, they would have never thought that they would be at this place with such a level of empowerment. I mean, they themselves are truly amazed with what has happened. And at the same time, they also say it's not enough. We're not there yet, And a lot of them are not happy with this, with the pace, with how fast the revolution is going. They want more changes and faster. But in any case, you see women everywhere you go, because their participation is ensured by the key mechanisms that actually Meredith mentioned in her presentation, that were developed initially by the Kurdish movement, women's movement in Turkey. And those mechanisms are the co-chair system, one woman, one man in each leadership position, women's quotas, which have just recently been raised in Rojava from 40% to 50%. So in every institution of the autonomous administration, it has to have 50% women, at least. And the other mechanism is women's autonomous councils, which again, have to exist as part of every institution connected to the autonomous administration. So for example, women of the university, where I spent most of my time, they have their autonomous women's council, which exists parallel to the general mixed gender council that sort of acts like a governing body of the university. And they decide on all the issues concerning women. Like, they have a veto power over these type of decisions. The General Council, the mixed gender body, cannot take those decisions. For example, if a department at the university, if they want to fire a woman teacher or replace a woman co-chair, they cannot do that by themselves unless there is consent of this Women's Autonomous Council. And I was told that for men, it's still a little bit difficult sort of to swallow that women are wielding so much power. And I personally heard some teachers, some professors, and some students talking about the women's autonomous organizing in a belittling way, saying that, women, they just don't know what they're doing. These autonomous meetings are just a waste of time, and they don't know what to do with their freedom. And a representative of the Women's Autonomous Council at the university said, what do you expect? Men are just trying to, deal with the new reality in which they're losing power. You have this gender dynamics, gender power changing, in radical ways. And that's kind of part of an ongoing struggle, the fact that, it's gonna take a while to change men's minds and to get them to, genuinely, like from their heart, to accept these changes. And again, as I said, everyone sort of recognizes that building new institutions is not enough. You have to change mentality. And so, if you really want to have a long-lasting change, that's not gonna get reversed on the next day. So in this regard, a very positive development is that genealogy, I don't know how many of you have heard this term, women's science, that's the term in Kurdish, that was again kind of initiated by the Kurdish women's movement in Turkey, and then spread, transnationally. It is now taught at school as a mandatory subject to both boys and girls. And it's a requirement for undergraduate students, both genders, no matter what they study. And it is also taught to all of the institutions of the autonomous administration. And again, it's a struggle, And one genealogy teacher whom I got to know, she, for example, was given a series of workshops to members of the security forces, and most of whom were Arab men. And she said that she had to argue with them a lot because the Arab society is more conservative than Kurdish even. And for example, on the issue of polygamy, it's a very sensitive topic, and even though the autonomous administration passed a law to ban polygamy, they cannot enforce it in Arab majority regions. And so what do these genealogy teachers do? What she does, she brings Quran to the lesson, and she reads the passages from the Quran, showing that the Prophet Muhammad didn't really approve that men having more than one wife. So it's a struggle, and they finding, they're fighting this struggle, on the territory of the people whose minds that they want to change, right? And speaking of Arab men and Arab society, it's really, oh my gosh, I forgot that I had pictures. Okay, well, this is the university. This was actually an action, a small action, where they read out a statement against the Turkish attacks that still continue. And this was a conference, a women's conference that took place at the university, but that was organized by the women's movement across the entire region of North-East Syria. And there are even women from other parts of Syria who came to attend, and also from outside Syria, from the broader Middle East. And this is from a book that they use in their genealogy classes. Here you can see a woman trying to handling a lot of household errands, and I think there is one baby. And okay, and this is what I wanted to share. So, while Arab men, as I already mentioned, they haven't really been willing to, accept the new ideas of gender equality, Arab women, on the contrary, have embraced them, with great enthusiasm. And so this is a picture from an office of Zanubia, which is an Arab women's organization, relatively new. I think it was founded last year. And it operates in all of the Arab majority areas of North and East Syria. And they told me that they have been inspired by the Kurdish women's movement, and they decided to adopt a similar model of organizing. And so again, they told me that the Arab society is more conservative, so that's why they feel like it's more difficult for them to do their work. And that's why they have only been able to implement some of the new laws and mechanisms concerning gender equality in their areas, but not all. But they are working hard to change the situation. For example, they have meetings with the sheikhs, who are traditional leaders of Arab tribes. You can imagine, pretty conservative. And they try to get them on their side through discussions, through debates. They also go to women's houses. They visit women and talk to them about their new rights. And they also visit women who are known to be ISIS supporters. There are still those. ISIS has been defeated territorially, but I've heard this over and over again, that ISIS mentality, it can be easily found, anywhere you go. And so they go to those women and they talk to them as well, and they try to convince them. I also have a picture. Yes, this is their office. You can see that Raqqa, you can see, the effects of the ISIS occupation and the war against ISIS. Reconstruction has been ongoing, but there are damaged buildings, everywhere you go in the city. And, very often in the city, in Raqqa, you see these murals that try to popularize the new ideas of the revolution. And this one, you don't even need to know Arabic. I think you probably can guess, but this is basically represents the co-chair system, one of the mechanisms that they have been trying to implement all over. And this, I thought it was so symbolic. This picture was taken at the stadium that used to be an ISIS prison. It's a notorious prison. People call it prison of death. And people usually visit when they go to Raqqa, because it has such an emotional significance. And we met these 3 young women. 2 of them are Kurdish and 1 is Arab. And they were learning karate inside the stadium. Self-defense, right? We are talking about women's self-defense. And this memorial, this is a memorial on their left. It's a memorial to the Yazidi women who were, enslaved and murdered by ISIS. Those Yazidi women about whom Steven was talking. So I think this is very, very powerful and very promising. And this is from an office of the Armenian Social Council, who also has a women's, women's autonomous council. And Armenian women have also followed the example of the Kurdish women's movement, and they just recently had their very first Armenian Women's Congress, where they decided to establish Armenian Women's Union. So again, different women from different ethnic and religious groups are picking up on these ideas and developing them, separately by combining it with their struggle for their ethnic and religious identities. And speaking of different, ethnic and religious groups, this is from the Congress, Armenian Women's Congress. Speaking of different ethnic and religious groups, I would like to spend some time on this, on the autonomous administration's efforts to implement a vision of pluralism, of peaceful coexistence, of brothership of peoples, as they say themselves. And I think it's very crucial for this region and for the survival of the project, because its legitimacy depends on their ability to incorporate, to win to their side, members of different groups that inhabit the region. And the movement is not envisioning it as a Kurdish project. They envision this as an alternative, for North and East Syria, for Syria as a whole, for the Middle East, and for the rest of the world eventually. So Yazidis. There are also Yazidis in North-East Syria. And they're one example of a minority group taking advantage of new opportunities that opened up to them thanks to the revolution. And here, by the way, this picture was from Raqqa again, and it's a mural, another mural, and this one represents, the brothership of peoples. You see different types of clothing. These are traditional clothes of different ethnic groups: Arabs, Kurds, Turkmens, Circassians. And this is Yazidi's house, Mala Yazidi, which I visited in Amude. And Yazidis in Syria, under the Syrian government before the revolution, they were marginalized, vilified. I mean, the situation was quite similar. They were oppressed, both as an ethnic and as a religious community, because most of them identify as Kurds as well. And now they feel like their reality has been completely transformed. I mean, their position in the society, because now they can have centers where they teach religion to their children. Again, unprecedented, never happened before. They are working with the autonomous administration to incorporate different religions into the general school curriculum. Before, every child had to study Islam, no matter what their affiliation of their family was. And they also have a political representation through quotas. So the quotas are not just for women, they're also for ethnic and religious minorities. And so they're guaranteed representation on all levels of the new political system. And here's inside of the house of Yazidis, and you can see a picture of one of their martyrs, a Yazidi woman who fell martyr in the fight against ISIS, I believe in Shingal, in Sinjar, in the region where which Steven visited. Now, this is another picture from the Armenian Social Council. This old Armenian woman, her family was a victim of the Armenian genocide in the beginning of the 20th century. She lost her family members, but she was really the only one in the Armenian Social Council's office who spoke Armenian, because they were so marginalized and so affected by the genocide that they lost their culture, they lost their language. She was the only one who spoke, and when we asked her to say something in Armenian, she started saying it, and then she broke into tears. So this is just, you really have to understand how important these ethnic and religious identities are to people. This is not something that you can just disregard, as something, as a side issue. In this region, she personally didn't experience the genocide, but she feels it. We could tell she was feeling it in her body. So Armenians also taking advantages of the new opportunities. They have also just obtained a right to representation, political representation through quotas, just like Yazidis. And they are working on a plan with the autonomous administration to incorporate Armenian language into the school curriculum. At the same time, I would like to point out, because this is something that I discovered for myself, there are divisions within the Christian minority communities. By Christians, I mean mostly Armenians, Syriacs, and Assyrians. And in particular, in Kamishlo, where I stayed, they actually used to be a privileged group. So the Syrian government actually used the divide and rule policy. So in certain areas, they privileged this minority because they wanted to pit them against the Kurds. Kamishlo is a Kurdish majority city. So it's an interesting discovery, because I actually was living in a Christian neighborhood, and when I would go to a store and try to speak Kurdish to them, they would refuse to speak it to me. They would insist that I would speak Arabic to them. Why? They were a privileged group. Now with the autonomous administration, they lost their privileges, and a lot of them openly express their opposition to this new project. Okay, where are we? Okay, so we are back to Raqqa. I just want to talk a little bit more about Arabs, the Arab population of North-East Syria. So most of them, and again, I'm talking a lot about these different ethnic and religious groups just because I really believe it's very important. Like their ability to talk to each other and work together is really important for the revolution. So Arabs, most of them support the autonomous administration, but for pragmatic reasons, not for ideological. what do I mean by pragmatic? They do not want to live under Assad regime, and they do not want to live under the rule of Syrian Islamist militias that are now mostly controlled by Turkey. So there is still, while they work with the administration, there is still a good amount of mistrust towards the Kurds, and even a perception that the autonomous administration in the Arab majority regions is a governing body that's imposed from outside, not even imposed, but set up by outsiders, right? Which is partially true, because it initiated in the Kurdish majority areas, and then it spread with the liberation of those Arab majority areas from ISIS. And of course, as I already mentioned, there is lack of acceptance of the revolutionary program, especially women's rights. And I'm generalizing. I mean, of course, it's not, everything is not 100%. And there are, I've met personally people who, who genuinely supported the project. But that said, it appears that the administration, needs to balance its pursuit of a radical political project with this need to incorporate the Arab population in the democratic and egalitarian ways. And it's been a kind of not an easy task because ISIS and the Syrian government have been trying to sabotage Kurdish Arab collaboration. For example, ISIS has been assassinating Arab leaders who work with the administration, and that has had a terrible effect. But now, so this is Raqqa again. You can see destruction everywhere. Now to more positive things. One example of how the movement is trying to work together with other groups and popularize their ideas is Al-Sharq University in Raqqa. That's the newest university that has been set up by the autonomous administration. Most of the professors and students are Arabs, and they generally join because they need jobs. No, not for ideological reasons, but then once they're within the university, they become gradually exposed to the ideas of the new system, and people believe that this is how they can increase the acceptance of the revolutionary ideas. So, for example, when I visited the university this summer, all professors from all disciplines, they had to take several weeks long workshop that was framed as incorporation of humanities and social sciences into the general academic program, which is something that's lacking at the universities of the Syrian government. And what they were doing, they were given workshops on philosophy, history of social sciences, historical and sociological approach to religion, which is a very sensitive topic. These professors were introduced to the ideas of Plato, Socrates, Aristotle. They were told to, not to see philosophy and religion as opposing bodies. Apparently, even just reading philosophy is offensive to them because of the discussions of, of God. And, overall, sort of the aim of this workshop was to encourage critical thinking about everything, about society, about politics, about religion, and open their minds so that they can accept new ideas, that they can think about them critically, so that they can take them on by themselves. And they also read some passages from Öcalan's Sociology of Freedom. Those who know, And I wanted to include this photo, which is for me symbolic of this effort, between Kurds and Arabs to work together. I took it at a graduation ceremony of Asayish. Asayish is an internal security force that was set up by the autonomous administration. And you can see here an Arab sheikh who is dancing together with a Kurdish woman. And there was a moment when dancing started and they invited the sheikh, and it was a little bit awkward, but it happened. They danced together. So, you know, everyone felt good. Okay, and before I run out of time, I also want to talk about the attempts to build the directly democratic system, namely, you know, build communes as the main unit of political decision making. So the entire North-East Syria is now administratively subdivided into communes, which on average consist of 200 families, but you know, it varies depending if it's in a city or in a village. And the communes are envisioned, you know, as I said, as the primary mechanisms through which people can partake in decision-making processes that affect their own lives, you know, through which they basically can take control over their lives. Communes have their offices. You know, you can easily find the commune office, you know, in Kamishlo. They have co-chairs. They have different committees. For example, I talked to you know, representatives of a reconciliation committee that works with the conflicts within the community, and they try to solve those conflicts without going to court. There are women's committees, self-defense committees, education committees, etc. And this photo is you know, from one of the commune offices with the two commune co-chairs, a woman and a man, and my translator and another member of the commune. And so formally the communes are in place. You know, as I said, you can easily find them. They're functioning. But you know, there are some challenges with how the system works. It doesn't work as it's supposed to work in theory. And this is something that I've heard from many people, because you know, people, commune members, they see, you know, whether it's working for them or not. And the main problem that I heard about was that the participation of people has been on a decline over the last few years. And apparently there is a tendency to view communes as administrative bodies. You know, for example, you go there and take a residency paper, you know, to apply to the university, or to see them as bodies that provide public services. For example, bread and gas, fuel subsidized by the administration. So basically, you know, there is a tendency among the people not to see them as tools of political decision making. And I was, you know, I talked to a lot of people about this, and I was given different explanations of, you know, why there is such a trend. And one reason that I heard was that people are just not used to doing politics in this way. They're not used to grassroots politics. And especially in Syria, I was told that before the revolution, any independent political organizing was discouraged and repressed. So people, and especially Kurds, were made deliberately apolitical. You know, the government didn't want people to be political in order to be, you know, be able to control them easier. And so, you know, now they are still continuing with this habit when other people are doing things for them. Now, the other explanation that I heard, that it appears that there is an overlap, a structural overlap between these communes and higher levels of decision making, that some decisions are taken at higher levels without consultations with communes, and there is no clarity as to which decisions, which initiatives the communes can take. So people sort of lost, they're not sure, you know how everything comes together. And I thought that this, you know, observation actually reflects something that late David Graeber wrote. You know, something that he wrote about, you know, his insight that the autonomous, you know, that the revolution didn't just set up a dual power situation vis-a-vis the Syrian government. They set up a dual power internally by building communes and by building more traditional representative bodies for pragmatic reasons, because they needed to incorporate, you know, other parties of the region. They didn't subscribe to this specific, directly democratic ideology, and to have sort of, central bodies that would do diplomacy on the international level. So, it was pragmatically driven, but it looks like there is a structural tension now between the two that, a lot of people that I talk to think that, needs to be addressed. And, I'm curious to see what will happen and how the movement will deal with this. And then another observation, that can explain, another explanation, for this lack of participation that I personally observed was just lack of hope, demoralization. As I mentioned in the beginning, the situation is really difficult, and I knew that it was. I had known before I went that it was difficult, but you really need to be there. You need to be there to understand how bad it is. Just on the most basic level, just difficult to live, because of all of this compounding crisis. And this actually leads me to very briefly talk about the external challenges that I mentioned in the beginning that make the life so difficult, right? Let me see if I have anything else. Okay. So earlier this year, you may remember Turkey renewed its threats of another invasion. They are currently occupying 2 areas of North-East Syria, and they wanted to occupy some more, but apparently they didn't get permission from any of the major powers, that have a say in that region, namely the United States and Russia. But what they did instead, they intensified attacks, drone attacks, and bombardments with heavy artillery on the region. And so now that is happening basically on the daily level, or on the daily basis. And local people, they think this is a new tactic. It's just a different tactic, short of a full invasion, to undermine the revolution, to make life difficult, to demoralize the local people. And they call it an invisible war because it has been largely met with silence by international community, because it's not a full-scale invasion, so no one seems to have noticed it. And this allowed Turkey to carry out acts as outrageous as killing 5 young school girls with a drone attack that targeted a UN-affiliated school. The girls were playing volleyball in the schoolyard. I mean, it's quite outrageous. A UN-affiliated school. They're really getting away with a lot here. And while I was in Kamishlo, there were several drone attacks that targeted military and political leaders, in particular, inside the city, and they killed the civilians who just happened to be around, that area that was targeted. And I wanted to show this picture. The woman in the middle, her name is Jiyan Tolhildan. She was one of the victims of one of those drone attacks. She's a prominent YPJ commander. There is a documentary about her. You can find it. I think it's called Jiyan's Life. And she was a presenter at that women's conference that I mentioned in the beginning. And she was killed on her way back from the conference, right outside Kamishlo on a major highway. I actually happened to drive by and we saw the burned car. And it was a huge loss. I mean, Turkey is really targeting the best people, and that's just another tactic to undermine the revolution. And so I think I'll finish here. I'll just say there are a lot of other means that Turkey is using to destroy the project. There is an embargo. There is a water crisis. Turkey has been cutting water of the major rivers, that come from Turkey into Rojava, and right now the region is experiencing a cholera outbreak because of that. But I want to add with this note, I mean, being there really brought home to me that in order for this project to survive, in order for it to achieve all its revolutionary goals, they can't really do it on their own. I mean, their enemies are just too powerful. They can't defeat them on their own. And I think, what it's really brought home to me that we should intensify our solidarity efforts if we genuinely want this revolution to succeed. And I hope we can also discuss organizing within the United States in the Q&A. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Anya and Steven. Now we'll have Debbie Bookchin to discuss some of these points for around 10 minutes, and then we will open it to the Q&A.
Thank you, Özlem, and thank you, Anya and Steven, for those presentations. Really a lot of information in a short period of time, and I think a really good and deep feeling for these two areas, in Iraq and in North-East Syria. And it's interesting, just one of the things that a sad thing that these two regions really have in common is just how much women have suffered, in the case of Sinjar, and right now in Rojava, how much they're suffering right now. And it's impossible really to observe what Turkey is doing right now in Rojava without calling it what it is, which is essentially femicide. I mean, they want to stop this revolution. They have decided that democracy has to go, but in particular, women's rights, and the extent to which women's rights in these areas now, especially with Sinjar having put many of these, practices into practice there. The extent to which it's threatening is really, it's not surprising, I suppose, because after all, Erdogan is, he's a tyrant. But the extent to which they're getting away with targeting women, and the fact that they can do that, and that there isn't a moral outcry, they are, in fact, by targeting the women who, as Anya said, many of them are really the leaders, they are really trying to sort of cut the head off of this revolution. But also, they are really basically making a statement that women don't have rights, and they should not have rights, and they should remain enslaved in one fashion or another. And I think that is a very interesting, and to sort of pick up on what Anya said about solidarity. I feel like anybody in this country, anybody around the world who considers themselves a feminist, should really be on the side of the women and of this revolution, which has done so much for women's rights. It's sort of a critical moment, I think, within our own movements. And that's the other thing that I think I want to mention, is that I think there's some really interesting lessons for the American left that come out of this project. And one of them has to do with education. As both Steven and Anya pointed out, this didn't happen overnight. And a lot of people think, there was a Syrian civil war and the Kurds just jumped in and they put these things into place. In fact, of course, they had been working on this for decades. And really, not only the women's movement, but also this whole idea of democratic confederalism, the idea that we're going to promote direct democracy and confederate, so that as much as possible, the power flows upwards. And I think that's a really interesting and important concept. I think obviously that it's something that the American left should not only support, but when I was in Rojava and I asked people there, what can we do? How can we support you? One of the things they said to me is, start doing this yourself. Try and put into practice these ideas, and including, and it's difficult, I know it is, but including this idea that, we have to create a sort of, again, as David Graeber said, a prefigurative version of what we want a new world to look like. And one of those things means not just electing progressive representatives, which is, all well and good, but actually starting to form new institutions the way the Kurds have done. And I think that and emphasizing education as part of that. I mean, education has been so important in this project. As both Steven and Anya mentioned, they've sort of institutionalized education in the form of academies and universities, and just literally in Rojava, the women went door to door and talked to other women. And it's a long process and it's not easy, but it's incredibly powerful to have these dialogues. And it's the only way that you can also do things like, incorporate people from other ethnicities who might not necessarily be as open to this project or as taking ideas, and leadership from the Kurds. So I think that those things are really important to keep in mind as we on the left sort of try and obviously also, facing our own pressures. I mean, we're just this close probably to, some kind of authoritarian government coming in. Who knows what's going to happen with the next Congress, with the next, presidential election. But we have to do more than just be reactive. We have to actually start really thinking about what kinds of forms of organization can help us grow a movement, which, as Meredith said, should be international, should really be focused on the power of women, and it is a huge power, around the world. So I'm going to let it go at that, and I think it's great to have questions. Thank you.
Of course, so I'll pass the mic around for Q&A.
Hello. Thank you so much. That was a great talk. I really enjoyed listening to you guys. I guess my question to start with, as a current student and someone who aspires to do things like this in the future, how did you start? How did you necessarily find a fixer in this area that's definitely hard to reach? And what was your kind of first inspiration to say, okay, I want to go in this region, to come back and tell the stories and so on?
Okay, so of course, for a documentarian, first issue is always access. How can I tell the story? Who can I talk to? And how close can I get to this story? And so I think the way to begin is wherever you start in life. So I'm an activist. I've been involved with Philippine movement for a really long time. So it was easier for me to think about, a film about the Philippine Revolution. And so for the Kurdish freedom movement, I'm totally new to it. So it was a completely different thing, from something that I've heard about since I was 7 years old, the Philippine Revolution. Then I go to a Kurdish freedom movement where all I've done is read a couple of books. And so a lot of that is just getting out there and trying to make as many contacts as possible. Remember also that the Kurdish freedom movement is decentralized. So it's not like there's 1-800 Kurdish freedom movement or anything like that, So you do have to make a number of contacts to see, what's going on and how can I be a part of this thing, And also another thing about my evolution as a filmmaker is that I also have been in different places, remote places where I would like to contribute something else besides being a filmmaker. So I've also become a combat medic. I became a New York EMT, driving an ambulance and on the streets of New York City for a little while. And then I have been in Sinjar training combat medics. I have a little bit of additional certification above just the basic EMT stuff for that kind of tactical thing. And so to see if I could participate more into these struggles. And so my thing is still evolving as well.
So After every question, we're gonna do this? No? Very briefly, I've been with the Emergency Committee for Rojava with our organization since 2018. So it's been 4 years, I spent 4 years organizing and learning before I actually went there. And when I first learned about this struggle, I was just so impressed by the fact that they're trying to change everything. Yeah, right? They're not just focusing on women. They're not just focusing on politics, democracy, or economy, right? They're doing everything at once. So that just felt so inspiring, so ambitious, and even utopic, right? But then, actually going there, it's quite difficult, I would say. And I would, people sometimes ask, like, how can I go there? And I tell them, well, think first, what's your goal? If your goal is to contribute to the revolution, maybe start organizing here, and because you are a constituent of the U.S. government and you have some power, right? I mean, maybe very little, but not zero. So it depends on what your goal is, and so I decided to go after all because we also want to learn. We don't just want to support the struggle, we also want to learn, as Debbie said, and to see how we can apply those lessons, in our own territories. And so, for that purpose, it's good to have people who go and come and then share the experiences, and you get a deeper understanding once you're on the ground. And at the university, they actually do encourage people to come and teach, but for now, the language is an issue because most of the students do not speak English, and they would not be able to provide a translator for every professor who comes to teach. So right now it's not so easy logistically, but in the future we hope if the border situation improves, which again Turkey, and if more students learn English, then it may be easier also to go and volunteer at the university as well, or in other initiatives too.
Thank you, Anya. While I'm bringing the mic, I'm going to say Anya was too modest to say she's also learned 2 different languages to study the Kurdish freedom movement. So
Yes, thank you. It's been really good to hear you. I'm wondering about you talked about the ISIS religious mentality. Are you talking about Sharia law? And I'm just wondering, how has that escalated since all of this? What is the status among, is that spreading? Is it receding, the mentality of Sharia law?
Thank you. I'll get 2 questions now, and then 2 more over there after these 2.
Hello. You talked about how important it is to kind of bring the movement here and start organizing here. And I was wondering if there is any collaboration or any organizing in Turkey, in Iraqi Kurdistan, in areas surrounding the project, if there's any collaboration between, first of all, if there's any solid organization in the surrounding areas, and if so, is there any communication and collaboration between Rojava and Sinjar and also these surrounding areas?
Yeah, let me start with but you may want to contribute. So about ISIS mentality, it's not just Sharia law. I mean, in fact, under the Syrian government, they used Sharia law for family matters. It's more like this fundamentalist, extreme, approach to religion. And the revolutionary movement, starting with the PKK, in Turkey, in Turkish Kurdistan, they have adopted this approach that we are not going to oppose religion as other revolutionaries had done in the past, oftentimes, because it's so important to people. You cannot tell people, stop worshiping your God, or, first of all, no one's going to listen to you. And second of all, you have to have a more nuanced, understanding of identity and of beliefs. And so actually, there are attempts, there are efforts to democratize Islam. That's how they frame it. There is a new institution called Democratic Islam, where they try to, interpret Islam in, more open-minded and progressive ways, and they try to spread that understanding, within the society to replace these more radical, fundamentalist views. And in terms of whether it's spreading, so actually I talked to the co-chairs of the Raqqa Civil Council, which is the basically municipality of Raqqa. And they told me that they are very concerned that the current economic situation may be contributing to the further spread of ISIS mentality. Why? Because ISIS, they recruit people from these lower classes, from young men who don't have jobs, who do not have opportunities, who do not feel that they have an alternative future. So they are very concerned that because the economic situation has been so difficult, I mean, again, the embargo is a real, really harms the economy. Turkey has, kept its border closed off, its border with the North-East Syria, the border with the Iraqi Kurdistan, which is an ally of Turkey, and a lot of times does just what Turkey tells them to do. That border has not been functioning well, and even bringing in basic necessities like sugar, flour has been very difficult, because they close it down arbitrarily, or they arbitrarily decide what they want to allow to go in, what and what not, and especially if it's something that the autonomous administration tries to import, they definitely make that more difficult for them, and oftentimes just don't allow goods to go in. So just wanted to mention that about the spread of mentality. Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, I think that regarding to Sharia law, I think that what's most easily said is that something that I was told almost immediately when I went to a region, and then Anya said it was told to her that ISIS is an idea. It's not, so they look at it as an organization, as a military force, but ISIS is an idea. And so that is really bad news, that ISIS is spread through that region. And wherever there are Sunni Muslims, it's just sort of like wherever there's white people, there's going to be racists. It's the same thing, that where there's Sunni Muslims, there is this possible trend towards extremism and hate of others. And so that is a problem. Now, in terms of the spread of the Rojava Revolution, I'll just give like a basic, that the Rojava Revolution is coming out of the Öcalan philosophy, which is really originating in parties in or discussions that happened in southern Turkey, the rise of the Kurdish movement in southern Turkey. So then what happened is there was a conceptualization of the Kurdish people as one, which means that they conceive of this territory as Kurdistan. Now, Rojava stands for West. So North-East Syria is Rojava, Kurdistan. Northern Iraq is Bashura-i Kurdistani. And Turkey is northern Kurdistan, Bakur Kurdistan. And that little piece of Iran where Kurds live is called Rojava Kurdistan, which is the home of, or was the home of Jinnah, Masa Amini, and is the Kurdish revolution within Iran that has gone on and gone up and gone down, and has had armed conflict, and the armed conflict has been brutally suppressed over the years in Iran, and now it's resurging and it's continuing. So that is the Kurdish freedom movement, and and then also the Kurdish freedom movement is an idea that comes also from Murray Bookchin and other thinkers, where Öcalan was integrating these ideas of direct democracy and anarchism and municipalism. And so, and now that idea came from those influences, and now it's spreading out across Europe and throughout the world, and even a little bit in the United States. And we would like to see more people understanding that Öcalan philosophy in the United States.
No, Özlem, would you like to talk about the situation in Turkey, northern Kurdistan, organizing there, since you are from that
I mean,
region?
sure. So there is, yeah. I mean,
You may want to come here for the video.
It's definitely we have a lot of questions, so I want to keep time for the questions. But yes, the movement, as Anya and Steven mentioned, it started in Bakur, which is in the borders of colonial Turkey. So if you go back, right, like this anti-colonial Kurdish freedom movement in the 1970s, starting as a Marxist-Leninist revolutionary movement, and to some extent the tendencies of socialism exist cross-border, and the communication, coordination between these regions all the same time while Turkey is attacking the revolutionaries and revolutionary organizations from all over the Kurdistan. And even today, right, you mentioned Gina Amini, and that's, I think, a very important thing maybe to recognize that the chant Jinjian Azadi has originated in the Kurdish freedom movement that was started in Bakur, within the borders of colonial Turkey. And so it has spread, and it has the potential to revolutionize societies. And so, as Steven said, ideas do spread, but also spreads organizationally. So that's been very important and powerful, I would say, for the Kurdish freedom movement to build the institutions and organizations, and with a focus on education, as Debbie mentioned, to spread the ideas. But it goes both ways, both the violence from the Turkish state and other states that are against, because this movement is the antithesis of what we have in the region and elsewhere. And this region is like the whole, we know the effect of global powers. And so when the PKK has emerged, it was also anti-NATO, and, and those tendencies still exist. So I also don't want the lesson to be just this, right, like bureaucratic or coordination between the USA, but its ideas are definitely dates back, and still to this day is promising, as Debbie said, for the left and progressive and feminist movements. So that was a long, convoluted answer because there's so much packed. I'll get more questions.
So my question is sort of about sort of extending like beyond demonstrating solidarity with the Rojavan people. You had mentioned organizing here, which a lot of the times when you go to international events like this, that's sort of shared. But I'm wondering if you could maybe share some strategies how to do that in the global North context, because I think the biggest issue is, I'm not sure in the panel mentioned the word, but demoralization. And I think a lot of the times, well, most minority groups, immigrants in the global North have experienced generations, centuries of demoralization. Debbie had mentioned that of like a fear of moving towards an authoritarian state here in the US, but for Black and Indigenous groups, we've long acknowledged that we've been facing authoritarian forces forever. So I guess my question is, I know just in my readings of what's going on in Rojava, trying to bring a revolutionary spirit to people who have been demoralized their whole life. When I speak to my mother who says words like, I just give up, like I don't fight anymore. Or in the US, people are scared to even enact in movements of mutual aid or demonstrations because of state violence. You can get killed for just being a minority in the US. You don't have to do anything political. Then doing something political, you can face state violence. And I think that the situation, the global right is so organized, particularly in the US right now, that I don't see any path of actually organizing and making a strong movement without there being actual violent tensions with the right wing, unless you project otherwise. But I guess sort of my main two questions are then, what is the strategy in Rojava to, I guess, heal fractured people who have been demoralized and boost the revolutionary morale? And I guess recontextualizing that in like a global north context here where many people are, I guess, have that spirit but are afraid to die. I think we're also demoralized through this hyper-capitalist society where you have to work constantly, you're too tired to even care beyond your family or yourself. So what are some strategies that you can share?
You know, I've been thinking about that a lot.
If you don't mind, maybe I'll get
A couple more? Okay.
Yes, a couple. Oh wait, I'll get back to you. Yes, you were first.
Yes, so sorry. Yeah, hi, my name's Chado. I'm from so-called Toronto, Canada. My question actually echoed yours. Up in Canada, our big socialist sector is called a Fight Back, but I don't see them anywhere as a community worker in community centers in our working class neighborhoods such as Driftwood, Jane and Finch, boroughs like North York, Scarborough. I actually came here to New York to kind of figure out seeing like movements such as the Young Lords that came from working class people, because me especially, being in a space like this, hearing that we have to go to universities to have these types of talks, it worries me because working class people, if I'm speaking from the people that, I was raised by working class racialized people, taken care of by working class racialized people in community groups to make sure that I got, to the age of 25 as an artist and as a community worker myself. Because I don't like to, because of in the quote unquote Canadian context, I would not consider myself or talk to myself as a leftist, a socialist, or a Marxist, because that alienates me from working class peoples right now. I consider myself a community worker. I'm a community worker. And I don't see people who speak on theory worried about the interpersonal conflicts. Because up in Canada, I would say that the real activism in Canada is led by Indigenous voices, and we don't even use the concepts of left and right. We use the concept of decolonization, right? And decolonization very much is about the healing and the decolonizing of self, where it's not just like white people are racist. We're all racist in some way. We're all racist, homophobic, or sexist in some sort of form because those are the systems we were born in. So the thing is that, like, I like to think of the fact of, like, with working class people, it starts with hope, right? So like you literally have to like empower them and make sure like they see themselves as like as frankly as heroes and as people that can fight back. And so for me personally, like I went to school for filmmaking, became a community worker because I had a shit time as a filmmaker. Then I got back into filmmaking. I run screenwriting programs and filmmaking programs that are for like racialized kids from underserved neighborhoods. And frankly, because like, theory that I learned in film school about Italian neorealism, the Soviet film school, yada, yada, yada. And about how, because my issue with like so-called Toronto is that our community programs are about uplifting individually racialized artists to become part of a system that are already created to sell an idea of racialized bodies that is palpable to whiteness. So for example, OVO and Drake, we have a program called the Remix Project Manifesto, which takes like young racialized kids, puts them into this pipeline to be graphic designers for like Nike, the Raptors, OVO, all that type of jazz, but we're not empowering racialized communities. And I think my biggest issue with socialist movements, or when we talk about socialism in spaces like this, and no disrespect to this space because I'm a guest here, but in Canada is the fact that like I don't see Marxists trying to speak to working class people, racialized people, or is that the fact, or acknowledging the fact that if you go to, for example, in Canada, our Latin population isn't like here. Our Latin population are all the Latin immigrants that moved between like the 60s and 90s who were like literally getting crushed in socialist movements. The survivors of genocides, of work improvements, and genocide of the mind. We're traumatized right now still. We don't want to collaborate with one another because that's how we were murdered and killed. Like my parents saw that. My parents see me doing community work and they're upset. So I guess like I think it's more the fact that I think what upsets me when we speak about like how do we mobilize these communities is how do you make sure that like, I ask people like, if the question here in New York, have you spoken to a 12-year-old black and brown kid about what they want to do with their dreams and their lives and how they want to help their community, right? Because I feel like even at the age of 25, like I've lost hope. Like all my programming is youth programming Because in my opinion, like the best I can do is like throw the line back and make sure like the kids coming up behind me are more prepared than I was. So I think that's that's my question, something that I'm wondering about. Like, how do we, like, when we talk about our neighborhoods here, or especially the fact that like international solidarity, Toronto's the first point of contact to America, and we haven't been speaking to each other, it seems, as two pillars of the East Coast of the global North, of racialized and working class people. So I think that's kind of like, what ideas do we have here? And I'm sorry for taking the mic for so long. I'm going to shut up now.
Okay, well, I think that the last two questions were related. Last two speakers, I think, kind of elevated us. Oh, you can't hear me? Why not? Okay. Oh, all right. And I think that first, the issue of demoralization, revolutionary spirit, and how these things, how capitalism can get us down, the struggle can get us down. It seems like we're losing battles all over the place. And so I just want to tell you this from the point of view of the being from Sinjar, the home of 400,000 Yazidi people. 210,000 are not in their home. 210,000 are in displacement camps, because it's still an active war zone and they're too scared to return home. So you have empty streets. It's really difficult. And so I would say that I've been thinking about what you guys have said a lot, because sometimes I feel that the Yazidi people have almost like what I might say called a collective manic depression or something like that. They're since I'm part of the health committee there, I've met many people who said in their family that, the head of the family can't leave the house. They used to do whatever they were doing, herding goats or having a job or whatever, and they can't seem to motivate themselves. And it was really common. And so what I would say about that is that somehow what I have noticed, and I noticed this in the Philippines too, is that when people are really at the tip of the spear of fighting against these forces that are oppressing them, when they are part of the revolutionary movement, these are the folks who seem to be battling that kind of feeling the most. They're the folks who are the most almost happy, and that there is a certain joy of being in a revolutionary collective and knowing that what we're doing is really making a difference. And so it's a very difficult, take for instance, to be an activist in the Philippines. You feel like armed people are getting ready to assassinate you all the time. You're always looking over your shoulder. And so these people are often forced to join the revolutionary movement and be part of the New People's Army. And when that happens, suddenly you're not worried about looking over your shoulder, because you like everybody, you're part of a military unit, so it's a lot easier, and the revolution feels a lot more real. And you're also living out in the country, and it's beautiful to be part, to feel that power of being part of a revolutionary collective. I think that's what I had to say about that.
First of all, I want to acknowledge these two questions, because I think they're really important, and I appreciate it. And I apologize that I haven't even had a direct line of sight for you guys. And also, frankly, as you said, absolutely. I mean, we may be thinking that the United States is turning some kind of weird corner into fascism, but certainly for people of color, there has never been democracy in this country. So that's really important, absolutely, to say right out. But I think you raised some really interesting questions about the left and about organizing and what it means to organize. And one of the things that and also how, frankly, much more organized the right is than the left. And so, and pardon me, my voice is a little bad today. So one of the things that I want to say is that one of the ways that the right has really succeeded over the past 2 or 3 decades is that they've gone and done on the local level some things that the left never felt it was very important to do. You know, they went and they joined all the school boards, and they became members of the Water Commission and the Electric Commission, and et cetera, et cetera. And they've really built in that way a kind of a propaganda machine, and also, again, sort of institutionalized their power. So one of the things that I think is really important to say, and I hate to say it because, you know, I'd like to think that the left is sort of more potent than it is, but is that we have to start thinking about how are we going to do things on a local level and talk to people in their communities and create, and some of you are doing that already, and I acknowledge that. But when we think about it in terms of like real political action, then it's a matter of going beyond like co-ops, beyond sort of organizing, which we have to do also for the many emergencies, and trying to institutionalize that kind of organizing so that, for example, in New York, after Superstorm Sandy, when the government was completely inept, you know, it was the people of the communities who went out, and people dug each other out, and they helped each other, and they brought food and all those solidarity efforts. But after the emergency passed, there was kind of nothing left. And this is similar with Occupy, and similar, you know, I could go on and on. And so what we have to do is sort of get people engaged. If there's an issue, whatever it could be, a power plant, you know, a need for a park, and start saying to people, okay, we're not just going to organize around this issue. We're going to now create communes, or whatever you want to call them, affinity groups or local organizing where people can come. And there are groups that are interested in doing this. One of them, for example, one of the real umbrella groups is Symbiosis. I don't know if anybody here has heard of the Symbiosis kind of, I don't know if the website might be called something like Symbiosis Revolution, but what they're trying to do is sort of connect municipalist type organizations that have sprung up, similar to in Europe, you know, where in local communities, these sort of municipalist organizations are coming together and saying, we're going to try a new model. We're going to not only organize around issues, but also organize around the idea of creating a whole new kind of politics, a grassroots, face-to-face, directly democratic politics, where instead of somebody just deciding, oh, I'm running for office, you can support me or not, it becomes a little popular assembly, and those people decide together, should we run somebody for city council? And this is obviously, I know this sounds like slow going, and it is slow going, but it's better to start and to really start, and then you do elect people to your local council instead of letting the right have the whole domain, you know, and you do start sort of inventing a new kind of politics. And honestly, like my dad has written a lot about this in some of the books that, for example, Özlem mentioned, but also, you know, there are other people who are doing it, and the Kurds are one great example of how you do it. You just start, and as Özlem was saying, you know, this began back in Turkey, not just in Rojava, but back in Turkey. The Kurds brought people into each sort of little local council in southeastern Turkey, and started, you know, and then they eventually elected mayors. And so we can do this here. You know, I really believe we can. It's a project to start. Anya, did you want to add anything? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if I may just add one small tiny thing, because I know there is like some concern with the concept of socialism or the abstract theory, or in Anya's talk, this divide between maybe the administrative and top high, you know, more structures like that versus the communes. I think it actually goes back to your question about what to expect next. Let's say we organize this way. Let's say we are from bottom up, right, organizing. I mean, what will the states do? And Kurds, I mean, I studied a massacre, a genocide that people of my hometown had gone through in 1938. And so if you organize, if you have autonomy, if you develop these mechanisms and structures, when they start to become viable and present an alternative to the system, you should also think of the question that you'll be attacked. If you're black, you'll be killed. If you are Kurd, you'll be killed by the state, and you are very aware of that violence. So that's why the top mechanisms, you know, that's not what we desire for an ideal world, the world that we want to live in, to build that world that we want to live in. But we also need to be ready for the world that we are currently living in. And then the question of self-defense and how to defend these mechanisms become important. And at that point, the central coordination between different institutions also become important. That's the reason why they continue to write, like, you organize from the bottom. And yes, you want to talk to the people, and that's how you grow. But how are you going to also be ready, be prepared for the violence that you're going to face by the capitalist state institutions? So that's some of the reasons why there is.
And while you're going to get some more questions, I'll just add one more thing to that, which is, I agree. I mean, I think socialism is a very problematic word right now, especially because of its long history as centralized government, you know, and I don't think it appeals to people, just as you've said. The thing to do is to talk to people about direct democracy. I mean, it really, you know, it is sort of, I mean, if Trump has taught us anything, it's that people are searching for something, you know, and I certainly believe that in the 2016 election, that had Bernie Sanders been rightfully nominated by the Democratic Party, he probably would have beaten Trump, you know. So, I mean, then by 2020 it was too late. But people really are looking for something new. And I think that it isn't socialism. It doesn't help us to call it socialism. We have to start thinking about it in a new way. And the same, you know, the same thing with violence. Honestly, we, on the one hand, you know, it is a very violent society, but on the other, we have to figure that long-term change is not going to happen through fights and the battles in the street. You know, it's going to happen because we convince enough people that change has to occur.
Continuing with the question of hope, I found both of your presentations incredibly hopeful, which is nice. I've read Meredith's book when it first came out, was very impressed. Like, how come nobody knows about this? I would talk to other friends on the left and like, huh, what are you talking about? And have since. Could you address the lack of response? I mean, I know some of why, but could you address the lack of support on the left for this revolution?
So speaking of changing people's minds, one of the most inspiring things I found from Steven's and Anya's presentations was discussing how the revolution was able to change the minds of some quite insistent misogynists. And I would love to know if you were able to witness someone go through that transformation, or if you can provide any other details, because I think that would be quite inspiring for us.
Because we're approaching 8 o'clock, I'm gonna just get all the questions, like, I mean, just 2 more, and then we can have an informal discussion after.
Thank you. I have a question, but before that, I want to say to Debbie's point, I think it is very true. I'm a lawyer, and I was just at the Navajo Nation, and we have to deal with right-wing groups taking over county elections, all kinds of elections. And right now we're fighting for literally just 1 more district, which means it will only be 2 versus 3, 2 being Navajo. In the end, like, this is gonna take years, and even if we get that additional district, we're still not at a majority. But my question is, I am from Palestine, and The first time I heard of the Rojava, I was very, very inspired because as a Palestinian, we have to live under very similar circumstances. Moreover, I really thought that the Kurdish and Palestinian solidarity, which has been prevented for so long, could bring some semblance of freedom to both of us. However, the more I learn about the situation, the more events proceed, I'm finding myself at a roadblock, because I think that there's a lot of U.S. imperialism support for the Rojavas and continued, so for example, in the 80s, they were stuck between the war between Iran and Iraq, and they were receiving funding, and they continued to receive funding. And again, this is happening again and again and again. And honestly, we all live under U.S. global domination. And I think that partnering with the main devil, I don't know what benefit it will bring, but I'm interested.
Thank you so much for the presentation. My question kind of jumps off of the sister from Palestine. My understanding of the current situation, my question is really about US sanctions on Syria. And my understanding of the current situation is that there's a profound economic crisis going on in Syria right now, which I mean, by Syria, I mean the parts that are controlled by the central government, which would be like Damascus, et cetera. And that this crisis is exacerbated tremendously by US sanctions, and that the Syrian government has been denied use of the resources, which are particularly agricultural resources, as well as petroleum resources that are in the northeast corner of the country. And this is the part of the Syria that's called Rojava, which is also a part of the country that has maybe about 1,000 US troops in it still. Trump talked about taking those troops out at one point and then got negated on that. And the troops are still there, and the troops provide kind of a tripwire for the forces in Damascus. Like if they go to the northeast side of the country, the US troops are like kind of a no-go zone, because then you have a war with the US. But this is also the places that's called the autonomous region of Syria. And I've studied social ecology, I've studied Meredith Bookchin. I have sympathy with the political project that's going on in Rojava. But like the sister was just speaking before me said, the question comes up for me, like, what kind of revolution is this when it depends on US military involvement? And I guess just what does it mean then for the rest of Syria, which is being economically strangled by US imperialist sanctions regime at the very same time that the central government is being denied access to some of its resource-rich areas of the country? Thank you.
Last question.
Pretty simple question. You mentioned Symbiosis as an organization you think is, bringing the revolution home in the spirit of Rojava. I'm wondering from you and from the rest of the panel, what else have you seen people doing specifically in New York or the U.S. or areas where people here might spend their time? What groups have you seen that you also think are in that spirit? Yeah.
Thank you, everyone, for the questions.
So I'll try to combine two questions here. Your question about why the left did not know enough about this revolution, and then actually I'm combining three questions. Let's see if I can do that. Right, and didn't support, right? So one of the reasons specifically for the left is precisely, the US support, right? But I think it's important to know what kind of support there has been, why the Kurds have accepted that support, and how they view that support, and vis-a-vis their larger long-term strategical goals. And you ask, how can that be beneficial? Well, unfortunately for the Kurds, during the fight against ISIS, that was a life and death situation, and without air support, ISIS was about to take over Kobani. That was like the point when the United States provided air support to the Kurdish forces when they were about to be defeated by ISIS. And I think we know what ISIS do, right? When they took over the territory, it was a really, literally life and death situation. And I talked about this, to the movement actors, whom I met, and they emphasize this fact. It's a tactical engagement, and they said, remind people in the United States, they told me, that we have existed since 1970s as a movement. And this is just one moment in time when we are collaborating with the United States, and for the reasons that I just mentioned. And it's a tactical, we are not abandoning our revolutionary goals. We're not abandoning our strategic goals, of overcoming capitalism and colonialism and imperialism. But at this moment in time, in order for this revolutionary project to survive, we need to, have this limited support from the United States. It's quite limited. At the moment, they're only collaborating to provide support in the, continuing struggle to eliminate the remnants of ISIS, and to, they also provide resources for the camps, where the former ISIS fighters are kept, which is also a shame because international community just basically dumped those ISIS fighters, many of whom came from Europe and the United States and Canada, and they have been basically dumped on the autonomous administration, and they have to take care of them. And you can imagine how many resources they have to do that, right? So yes, they do not see, the United States as, sort of doing some humanitarian thing for them. It's the pragmatic necessity, right? They don't have that many options. And about oil and agricultural resources and sanctions. So first of all, about sanctions, the autonomous administration has been advocating to lift the sanctions on the entire of Syria. Unfortunately, the United States only lifted those sanctions on North and East Syria. Yeah, very recently, just a few months ago. But that, that was not what the autonomous administration was asking. They were asking remove sanctions on the whole of Syria because they consider themselves as part of Syria. They see their future as part of Syria. They don't want an independent state. They don't want a project that we see in Iraq with Iraqi Kurdistan. That's not the model that they're following. Iraqi Kurdistan, it's a corrupt capitalist, regime that willingly collaborates with United States and Turkey, and acts as their proxy in the region. So that's not what this autonomous administration is trying to achieve. And actually, right now, this region, since the revolution, they're finally able to use their resources that are located in their region. Before, the region was extremely underdeveloped by the Syrian government. The Syrian government would just extract resources from this northern part, in particular, from the Kurdish majority part. They would just ship all the wheat, to the rest of the Syria. And there would be very restrictive laws on what local people could cultivate, because the economy of this region was subjugated to prerogatives of the Syrian government and the regions that it wanted to supply with these goods. So I would also encourage people to think through this in this way as well, because it's an anti-colonial struggle there, and they do trade with the Syrian government actually, and they do trade the the wheat that's being produced in North-East Syria and the oil. That they extract, and oil as well. Oil used to be extracted from this region and shipped to the rest of the country to be refined. There are no even refineries in this region because it was viewed as as an area just to extract resources. but not provide them. Okay, I'm getting lost a little bit here, but
Can I just add one quick point on the question, because I think there's a major difference, even though the last question said you built upon the one about the US alliance. There's a major difference between these two questions. I think the revolutionaries in the Kurdish movement are wary of the involvement of the US in the region. That's not what they want. They want the war to end, Turkish wars and attacks to end, and be left alone. And they don't want the US involvement. As Anya said, it's a military tactical alliance to survive. Now, would you, if you had ISIS and Turkey with guns in your door, accept guns from the US to protect your children? I bet most of you would. Now, there's a major question to watch out. And these are people who have experienced many genocides at the hand of 4 colonial states, all sponsored by Europe, first when it colonized the region and denied Kurds of their own state, and then at the hands of the US, who has supported its NATO ally, Turkey, in its war against Kurds since the 1970s. So that question starts to become offensive when it's framed like this. Now when Syria is deprived of one of its major resourceful areas, that's colonialism. Syria treated Rojava as its breadbasket. It prevented people from producing for themselves. It introduced monocropping, which, if you are familiar with the history of colonialism, colonial states always force monocropping onto the colonized. So they prevented Rojava, they prevented the Kurdish majority areas to produce their own food and to survive. And there's a major difference. Again, watch out for US imperial agendas potentially in the region. We're all aware of that. But in terms of preventing people to form their anti-colonial struggle against the state, Syrian state that has colonized them and forced economic policies on them, in addition to all the social political repression, then that's, let's maybe stop there and not not defend colonialism. While we are standing against US imperialism, we should not start to defend Syrian colonialism onto this Kurdish majority area, just because they are opposing the US. Oh, I know, I'm aware. Yeah, and Palestine, and that I welcome wholeheartedly. Exactly. No, exactly. Now that is, and yeah. Exactly. I mean, the oppressed people should come together against these, as you said, these forces. And I, for example, ECR is part of a global coalition for prison abolition, where we make, collaborations with people from Palestine and from the ground, oppressed people of all areas, right? We know Iran, while giving arms to Palestine, has colonized the Kurds and the Baloch and Turkmens and many others. So, to be attentive to these is very important. So I wholeheartedly, I'm with you on that. It's just
I would say that this issue related to the United States and the United States involvement, this is a very important issue, and I think that I agree with all the sentiments said. And I think that this is what Marxists would call a contradiction. Contradiction would be dialectically resolved through a eventually through the struggle. The revolution is a process. And so we see the revolution at this point in the process. The other thing I would say is that Kurdistan is a cross-border movement, and therefore there are a lot more contradictions, such as the Sinjar Defense Forces are aligned and get a ton of assistance from Iran-backed militias, Hashd al-Shabi, in Iraq. So you could say that the Sinjar Defense Forces are aligned with Iran. And yet, our forces, the Iranian fighters of PJAK, have fought against the Iranian government as well. And so there are a lot of contradictions because there's a lot of borders and there's a lot of different politics. And so in a sense, you're seeing a revolution in process. And that, I think, is important and is different from our capitalist mindset, which is, okay, can I order a revolution on Amazon and in 3 days, the revolution will come? Oh, this isn't exactly the revolution I wanted. Oh, it's a different color. Oh, let's, I'm Amazon Prime. I could return my revolution to something else, right? So if we choose another, we find our perfect revolution or whatever. Say, like, if I like Chiapas better than, say, Rojava or better than Philippine Revolution, I can go ahead and make that consumer choice. Oh, I like Chiapas, whatever. But those are different people. The people in Rojava are still there. The Kurds are still there, and they have rights, and so somebody has to, And so the other thing I would like to say about that is that we are all leftist activists, and you are here to learn. But now I want to say that you are no longer here to learn. You are here now to teach, and to go out and teach the other leftist activists, because there is an issue that a lot of people on the left do not want to embrace this. And I'll tell you why. It's very simple. Has to do with those contradictions that we were just talking about, but it's also much more that essentially left activists, and I'll make my argument, have never fought imperialism. And this is why. First of all, Oslam has said that, Americans like the fact that for centuries we have been extracting resources through colonization. And so, in a sense, we are comfortable with that. And so now that we have all the resources, let's be xenophobic and let's cut off everybody and U.S. out of everywhere and just let everybody just be victims to ISIS and other oppressions that have come from those centuries of colonization. So instead, leftist activists like the idea of the paradigm of charity and also human rights, but human rights as defined by NGOs and these major states, and they call it the international community, but what they're talking about international community is they want 10 minutes with Antony Blinken to talk about whatever oppression they're talking about, right? But that's always talking about the colonized people as victims. And so that's why I say left activists have never fought imperialism, because they're under this paradigm of human rights and charity. Instead, the way to fight imperialism is you have to read, say, like Huey P. Newton. Now, you might know this name, Huey P. Newton. He's like one of the greatest American revolutionaries of the 20th century, and he is also a socialist writer and a very, done a lot of amazing things. And so he said that fighting imperialism, you have to fight it all over the globe at once. You have to be friends with these global movements for liberation, and that's one thing I've dedicated my life about. The last thing I like to say about this is that I'll tell you the truth about what I saw. When I got to Sinjar and spoke with a lot of the Yazidi people, I did not know there was that much evil on the planet. Like, literally, I did not know that the human race could do all those evil things. And I refuse to even tell you about, mothers who've seen their babies killed and thrown in the trash can right in front of them. And what I have to say about that is that is like it's like a poison in your heart, when you confront that kind of evil. And the thing I would like to say is there's no way out except for the idea that you would give your life for the revolution. You would give your life to stop that from happening. And when you really confront that, it's actually rather easy, because when you think about your life, you're actually, all of us are going to die So you will eventually die. But in terms of justice, we have to make that justice. We have to do the justice. It's not eventual. So death is eventual, but justice is something that we have to make. And so I wanted to share that with you. But you all, leftist activists, don't think about Rojava revolution as how it's going to fit into how leftists think, how DSA thinks, or progressive Americans think. You have to think about it like the Rojava. If you support the Rojava revolution, you're going to change how leftists think, because it's the American left, the Western left, that has to change. It's not the Rojava revolution.
I mean, there was one question that was left unanswered, but I can talk to it first.
We can have an informal conversation for those of you who want to stay. And, thank you so much for being here. It's been over 2 hours. So thank you very much. And we hope to see you. We hope to hear from you. And we are going to be having a reading group meeting on 30th of this month. We are actually reading Öcalan's ideas of democratic confederalism. So if you added your email address to the sign-up sheet, then you will be receiving emails from us about these upcoming events. And again, there are books, there are brochures, books for sale, brochures, please take.
And the sign-up sheet, if you have not signed on, it's also on the table near the brochures and the books. Okay. Thank you so much for coming. I haven't tried how it works. I'm going to take you away from. Oh, that's stunning.